Imagine being the brightest mind in a city that literally guarded all the world's knowledge, and then being hunted for it. That's the story of Hypatia of Alexandria. She was this brilliant mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher in a world just full of clashing empires and faiths. Now, her story's been told and retold so many times, but who was the real woman behind the legend? Well, let's find out. Okay, so this is probably the face you've seen, right? It's elegant, it's thoughtful, and it's completely made up. Yeah, this portrait was painted in 1908, and it's become the image of Hypatia. But honestly, it tells us a lot more about what people in the 20th century wanted her to be than who she actually was back in the 5th century. So, first things first, we've got to separate the myth from the real person. And that's the big question here, isn't it? We're going to peel back all those legends, the feminist icon, the martyr for science, the last of the great pagan thinkers, and we're going to try to find the historical Hypatia. Because let me tell you, her real story is just as incredible, maybe even more so, than any of the myths. So, to really get Hypatia, you first have to get her city. We're talking about Alexandria in the late 4th century. This wasn't just some town. It was the intellectual capital of the entire Roman world. Think of it as this massive, buzzing crossroads of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman ideas. For centuries, it was really the only place that could even come close to Athens when it came to brainpower. And it's right here, in the middle of all this, that Hypatia was born into a life of learning. I mean, Hypatia's education was just extraordinary for anyone back then, let alone a woman. Her dad, Theon, was a huge deal in his own right, a super famous mathematician. He's the guy who created the version of Euclid's Elements that people used for centuries. He ran this prestigious school, the Museum, and get this, he personally taught his daughter, just immersing her in all the greatest works of math and astronomy from the classical world. Talk about an unconventional upbringing. And wow, she didn't just learn this stuff, she became a master teacher. Just listen to this. This quote is from one of her most famous students, a guy named Synesius, who, by the way, later became a Christian bishop. The reverence in his tone is just incredible. He says she presides over the mysteries of philosophy. That tells you everything. She wasn't just some lecturer, she was a charismatic guide, someone people deeply, deeply respected. And this right here is a super important point. Hypatia's school was not some pagan clubhouse in a world that was becoming more Christian. Not at all. It was an intellectual hub that brought in the best and brightest from all over. Pagans, Christians, people from all across the Mediterranean. For her, it was all about reason and knowledge. Religious dogma just wasn't part of the curriculum. Okay, so what was she actually teaching? Well, you have to remember, this was a time of massive social and religious turmoil. So what Hypatia was doing, it was more than just teaching. It was an act of preservation. She was basically safeguarding centuries of knowledge that was in real danger of just disappearing into the chaos. Some people describe her as more of a commentator than a true innovator, but that totally sells her short. Her real genius was being a translator of genius. She could take these incredibly dense, complex works from the greatest minds and make them understandable for her students. That's how she ensured this knowledge would actually survive for future generations. And we're talking about the absolute heavyweights of ancient math and science here. Diophantus's Arithmetica, that's basically the foundation for algebra. Apollonius's Conics, the go-to text for things like parabolas and ellipses. And then there's Ptolemy's Almagest, which was the book on astronomy for the next 1400 years. And she wasn't just a theorist either. She's also credited with improving instruments like the astrolabe, which they used to study the stars. The woman mastered and taught all of it. Okay, and to really, really appreciate what she was doing, you gotta look at this. This is the Greek numeral system she was working with. Every single letter has a number value. There's no 0 to hold a place. There's no simple x plus y equals z. Nothing like that. Every single problem was this massive, complex beast of geometry and logic. The level of abstract thinking this required is just immense. So, on the philosophy side of things, Hypatia was what we call a Neoplatonist, but her version was all about using pure reason and logic to understand the divine, which they called the One. This wasn't about rituals or magic or anything like that. It was a totally intellectual and spiritual quest. And that rational, logical approach, that's exactly why she was so good at teaching students from all sorts of different religious backgrounds. But here's the thing. Her world of pure logic and reason existed inside a city that was tearing itself apart with brutal politics. And we absolutely cannot understand what happened to her without understanding the vicious power struggle that was about to swallow Alexandria whole. And really, the whole conflict boiled down to these two guys. On one side, you've got Orestes. He's the Roman prefect, the guy representing the official government power. And on the other side, you've got Cyril, the super powerful and ambitious bishop of Alexandria, representing the growing power of the church. And these two were locked in a nasty, bitter fight for control of the entire city.
Now here's the crucial part. Hypatia wasn't just some scholar hidden away in a library. No way. She was a major public figure with a ton of influence. She gave public lectures, she spoke with city leaders, and most importantly, she was a close friend and a trusted advisor to Orestes, the Roman prefect. So, in a city being ripped apart by these two forces, the fact that she was advising the government guy, well, that made her a direct political threat to the other guy, Cyril.
And that political connection, that's what would ultimately seal her fate. Her death wasn't a random act of mob violence. Make no mistake, it was a political assassination. It was fueled by rumors, and it was designed to take a key player right off the board. And we know this because a historian from that time, a Christian historian, mind you, named Socrates Scholasticus, spells it out for us. He says flat out, the motive was political jealousy. Vicious rumors were spread that Hypatia, this pagan philosopher, was the one poisoning Orestes' mind, stopping him from making peace with Bishop Cyril. She was turned into the perfect scapegoat. What happened in March of 415 is just chilling. As Hypatia was heading home, a mob ambushed her carriage. They dragged her into a church, they stripped her, and they murdered her with shards of pottery or roof tiles. Then they tore her body apart, dragged the pieces through the city, and burned them. This was an act of extreme, symbolic violence. It was meant to send a terrifying message. Hypatia's murder sent shockwaves across the Roman Empire. But in a strange way, her story was really just beginning. After she died, she was transformed from a real person into this powerful symbol, a symbol that just about every era since has reshaped to fit its own narrative. Okay, first, let's get the biggest myth out of the way. Her death did not mean the end of learning in Alexandria. This whole idea that she was the last great scholar and then the lights just went out on the classical world, it's a romantic story, but it's not true. Scholarship and philosophy continued in that city for another 200 years after she was gone. So how did her story change so much over time? Well, for the pagans who came after her, she was a martyr for philosophy. Then, in the Middle Ages, pieces of her story, her wisdom, her brutal death, got absorbed into the legend of a Christian saint, Saint Catherine. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, and writers like Voltaire turned her into this icon of pure reason destroyed by religious fanaticism. And today, we celebrate her as a pioneer for women in STEM and a symbol of feminist courage. So when you boil it all down, her true legacy isn't really about the politics that got her killed, or even the myths that came later. Her real impact, the thing that lasted, was on the minds of the people she taught. I mean, the empires of her day, they're long gone, but the knowledge she fought to preserve and the minds she inspired, that's the stuff that echoes through time. They silenced her, yes, but the spirit of what she did, that endures. Her life is this powerful testament to what it means to have intellectual courage, especially when you're facing down intolerance. And really, she leaves us with a question that's just as powerful today as it was 1600 years ago. What if you dared to know?